Hi there. My name is James McCool. I'm the owner of PaydirtDFS.com, and today we're going to be doing some talk about contest sims, and we're also going to be taking a look at the NFL contest sim that I have over at Paydirt. This is going to be more of a talk about contest sims than it is about the actual contest sim that I have built, mostly because I think that the conversation around contest simulations is important to have going into this year because so many people are flaunting them as their cool new thing. So let's kind of just jump right in. First off, if you have not been a subscriber over at Paydirt or don't know who I am, I've been doing contest simulations at Paydirt, or not contest simulations. I've been doing simulations over at Paydirt for years now. I've done mostly player simulations. I've done a lot of game level simulations as well. But player level simulations has been mostly what I have been working with up until more recently in the last year or so when I have been trying to work towards some more of the contest simulation stuff. So I have pretty good breadth of knowledge on this kind of stuff and doing simulations and everything and what it takes to actually build out a good simulation program. So first off, let me say that I think that most of what the industry is going to build here is going to be very useful. I don't know that what most of the industry is going to build here is going to be what they say that it's going to be. I don't think that Skotastic actually has a contest simulation program. I think that what they have is a simulation program that simulates lineups against each other, which is really useful and very cool. And they have a really good interface, and I think they've built a pretty cool product. But I don't think that it's actually simulating contests, and I'll talk about that for a second here in a couple minutes. SaberSim has a very good contest simulation product because they have been working with simulations for a while, so they have a really good grasp of how to do that effectively. I think I did also see that the guys over at ETR. And their product is Solver, they are also putting out some sort of sim-based package, although I'm not exactly sure what that one is going to entail. I don't think that it's done yet, so I think they're still working on it. But pretty much everyone's going to have one, right? Some sort of product that is dealing with some sort of simulation program to some level. So let's talk about actually what a contest simulation program is, or what it should be. A contest simulation is looking to simulate the results of some sort of DFS contest, utilizing projections and also, more specifically, ownership. And that's kind of the thing that I think a lot of people miss out on this. So what you're doing is, say there's a contest with 500 entries, and you want to see the results of that contest over 5,000 simulations, 10,000 simulations, whatever, and then see what the most effective route is towards winning that contest. The overall goal of a contest simulation program, I believe, should be guiding you towards where the inefficiencies are in the ownership of the field based on that contest, so that you can then make decisions in whatever optimizer program you use to then create a portfolio of lineups that can do well in that contest. And it's going to be different based on the size of the contest, based on the sharpness of the contest, stuff like that. So in order to create a contest simulation, you need to do a couple different things. First off, you need to get the field right. And that's kind of the part where I think it is the hardest in relation to what people can actually achieve right now in the industry. It's the reason why I think that Skotastic doesn't actually have a contest sim. I think that they have a portfolio simulation program, because what you have to do over at Skotastic is create the field manually. And I think that's really hard to do, and I don't think that you can really do it ad hoc with an optimizer, because optimizers assume logical connections between players and assume a lot of different things, and that's not how the field works. I mean, you go into an optimizer and you try to create shitty lineups that 15% of the field is using in every sport. It's just probably not going to happen. You're not going to do a good enough job. You can't create duplicated lineups. You can't, that. There are certain illogical things that you can't do in an optimizer that have to be accounted for when you're creating a field. So getting the field creation right is the first part of that, and that's why ownership is such an important aspect of this. The second part of it, obviously, is the projections. And when you're doing a contest simulation program, first off, if you insert your own portfolio into a 5,000 entry contest, say that you have 100 lineups that you built, and you insert it into a 5,000 person contest, and then you simulate that contest 5,000 times. Assuming you got the field right, and assuming your ownership projections are pretty good, if you use your own projections, what you're going to end up seeing is that your 100 lineups are always going to have really, really high win equity in that field, specifically because you are using your own projections. There's an inherent bias to contest simulation programs in that way that if you use your own projection set, say ETR, right? Like say that they get their product out for NFL season, and they use their own projections. What you're going to see is that any user that simulates a contest using their own projections is going to think that whatever lineups they created are going to be the best possible lineups to use. So that's going to be important to a point that I make later. And then the last part of it is, okay, so you got the field right using ownership and creating things based on logical and logical theories. And then you have the projections, so then you insert your portfolio into that, and then you see, oh, hey, I have all these lineups now. The last part of it is going to be how much equity are those lineups worth. And at a player level, you can do it at a player level too. I think that's something that Stochastic does that's really, really cool, as it shows you kind of the equity of the individual players within the simulation that you ran and your portfolio that you're running. So those three things kind of come together to tell you, okay, I have this field, I have simulated a field, I have my portfolio of lineups, I know how often they are winning, and I know how much each lineup is worth based on an EV standpoint. That's a full-blown contest simulation program. And what that can tell you is, in the same way that when you use an optimizer to create an optimized lineup, what an optimizer is doing is taking players that have either high projection or high value and combining them together to give you the highest projection, right? What a contest simulation program should do is basically do the same thing with your portfolio. You have 150 lineups, or you have 1,000 lineups, or whatever, and you insert it into this contest simulation portfolio program. And then what it should be trying to do is taking lineups that have very high win equity and lineups that have very high cash equity and combine them to give you the highest overall ROI package for your portfolio. That's like end game situation for a real contest simulation program. I don't think that anybody will be able to do that because it's really, really hard. The hardest part of that actually ends up being that you have to then go get the payout structures for every single contest you could be running, or have users manually put them in, and that's a fucking bear. If somebody does it, that's awesome. That's a really, really cool program, but it's really hard to do. Pretty time consuming. So now that I've broken down all of that, really quick, before I get into what I think is going to happen in the industry with contest sims, I did want to show how to use and what my program is over at Paydirt. So all of those things considered, let's take a look at what the contest sim is going to be over at Paydirt, and I might actually have fucked some things up here a little bit, but that's okay. So what we have here is being able to take, you can upload your own stuff here, upload a projections file and or a portfolio, and a portfolio file. So we can go in and we can find, let's see, so for the portfolio, we'll just do DK port upload. And then, oops, this is the projections file. I am very good at working. So there's the projections file. And this is just coming from Lineup HQ. I'm not trying super hard here. But this is just 50 lineups based on Lineup HQ. You can see a portfolio view here of all of the lineups. This was ran yesterday, so I don't know if these are up to date. But you can see a portfolio view. You can see what your exposures are over here. And then you can actually simulate the portfolio against itself. I'm not going to do that in this display because I care more about the contest sim, but you can simulate all these lineups against each other and find out which ones have the highest win equity, which ones have the highest top 5 finish percentage within the lineups themselves, things like that. It's pretty cool. But this part isn't really the most important part. The most important part is the contest sim over here. So I'm going to go ahead and hit simulate contest and just let it start running. So what we have here is you're going to be able to load in certain data. For Paydirt subscribers, obviously if you have access to this, you're a Paydirt subscriber, but main slate, secondary slate, and then this is actually going to be Thursday through Monday once I change that. Or you can choose to use the portfolios, or you can choose to use the projections that you uploaded on the first page. You can use user. And then you choose DraftKings or FanDuel. You're going to be able to upload a portfolio here pretty soon. I just haven't added in that functionality yet. That's happening today. But you'll be able to upload your portfolio and insert that into whatever contest you're looking at. You're then going to choose what size the contest is that you're simulating, between small, medium, and large. You're going to choose how many times you're simulating it. You can simulate it up to 10,000 times if you feel like it. I usually do about 5,000 times, just for reference. You're going to choose how sharp the field is, between not very, average, and sharp. And then you're going to choose how deep the seed frame should be. So I'll talk about seed frames, but you'll be able to choose between shallow, medium, and extensive. So what this is doing is, it's with the seed frames, it is taking the projections that you're uploading, and then it is using ownership to create a whole bunch of lineups. Technically, in my own program that I run on my own local desktop, it is using 50 million lineups. I have some limitations, so I had to do some things with this in terms of memory constraints in this app structure, but it's still getting up to at least 15 million lineups created, and then up to 30 million lineups created if you choose to do an extensive seed frame. And then what it's doing after that is it is creating a whole bunch of lineups, and then it is taking lineups that are applicable towards DFS based on the site that you're looking, and then pulling from those a random set, and then creating the field using that random set of lineups created from the seed frame. So what it'll do is it'll create a whole bunch of lineups here that, and this is just going to show you the top 100 lineups based on GPP projection, which is something that I developed to show you what lineups are good for GPPs. And it's not necessarily going to show you the highest projected lineup from the seed frame, but it will show you the ones that you should probably be using. So this one was not a very sharp field. You're going to see a handful of lineups that don't really matter all that much up here, like Anthony Richardson with, well, actually this lineup's pretty good, but if we go down farther, Deshaun Watson with, I don't know, Jordan Addison, like there's going to be some lineups that show up here that are not super great, but that doesn't mean that they're not good lineups. All of these lineups, the key here is that all of these lineups ended up winning the simulation of the contest at some point based on the 1,000 simulations. So any of these lineups are valuable. Any of these lineups are viable to use in a small field contest if the contest is not very sharp, and that's kind of the key. So if we look at this and we say, okay, this is based on a not very sharp field, what are the ownerships looking like versus the exposures? So the exposure is how often a lineup ended up winning the contest, or a player ended up being in a lineup that won a contest, and the projected ownership is what their projected ownership is. So we can see if we just sort by edge here, and this is just the difference between the two, we can see that Jamal Williams didn't end up in the winning frames very often at all, but his projected ownership is 29%. Same with Kenneth Walker. These two look like relatively bad chalk based on these projections. These are not finalized yet. If you sort it by the highest, then you can see that Joe Mixon was actually the highest overall win equity player, or the highest overall leverage equity player in the contest simulations. He showed up in 18% of winning lineups. He's only projected at 3.5% of ownership. So really quick, let's go over to QB exposures. So remember, we're looking at a not very sharp field here. Sam Howell shows up in 13% of the winning lineups, but his projected ownership is 15%. Now, what happens if we change this to a very sharp field? So we're going to go ahead and simulate the contest again. And what this is going to do is it's going to then tighten up the constraints and make it so that the only lineups that are being created are lineups that are going to be better, using the players that the field considers as good plays. So we should see more of Sam Howell. We should see a little bit more of those high-owned players that are showing up as not very equitable in shallow field or in not very sharp fields. Another really big key here is currently we're using Paydirt projections to do this. So Paydirt projections are really down on Kenneth Walker and Jamal Williams. So that's why he's not showing up in the winning lineups for the frames. When I change this over to user in a second so that we can see what the RotoGrinders projections say, we should assume that those two end up being in a lot more of the winning frames. That's because the frames are being created using ownership, a mix of ownership and projection and value, right? So based on whether it's a sharp or a not sharp contest, it's going to be creating lineups that have higher ownership, median projection, stuff like that. And then what it's doing to actually say, hey, here are the players that have the best leverage and equity, it's then using whatever projection set you uploaded to then simulate out the contests. So now that we did a sharper field, if we go and look at the QB exposures, look, Sam Howell now in 20% of lineups. His exposure has jumped up quite a bit. That's because the seed frames that were created and the way that the contests were then ran means that Sam Howell ends up being much more or having much more exposure in the winning frames and in the seed frames. So then he ends up being a better play because the contest field is sharp. So that's a really, really important thing here. If we go and look here, we can see that Jamal Williams, Kenneth Walker still have negative edge, but not quite as high of negative edge. So remember, this is using Paydirt projections. If we use the RotoGrinders projections, we're going to switch over to user here. And I hope this works because I haven't tested since I did some updates this morning. But if we use user and then we simulate the contest, then we get an error because I caused an issue. But that's okay. The point is that you'll be able to then use the user projections and then simulate out the contest. So this is kind of how you use it. And then after you simulate it out, then you can make some decisions based on where the edge lies, based on the inefficiencies in the ownership. So we'll simulate this out again based on, again, we're just going to use shallow, very sharp, and a small contest. Again, you can change these up to where you can simulate a large field contest with an extensive. It's going to take a lot longer. This takes about a minute or so to run based on a small field and a shallow seed frame. If you do a large field with like 10,000 simulations and an extensive seed frame, you'll be sitting here for like 10 minutes. It's just the nature of the beast because it's creating the fields real time. It's not pulling from back end like SaberSim does. So this one's going to be a little bit slower than SaberSim. I think I'm okay with that. I think that it does some really interesting things that SaberSim does not. Like creating frames real time and doing randomized frames rather than the same frame each time. So once we have our seed frame, then we can say, okay, I have built the optimal lineup. I've used whatever optimizer I feel like using. And then I ran the contest simulations for the contest that I'm going to be playing. So what decision should I be making? So if you ran the optimal and then you see based on the edge that somebody like Jamal Williams looks like a really bad play based on the projection set that you're using, maybe you would want to get off of him, right? Maybe you would want to then say, okay, well, instead, maybe I should be using somebody else. Let's sort by edge up here. So Joe Mixon looks really good. Rachaad White at 5,500 looks like a play that you would want to use. He's pretty close in terms of salary there, right? So it just allows you to make some choices. So yeah, maybe you would use Rachaad White instead of Kenneth Walker at 6K. You could just drop down the $500, then you have a little bit of money to spend on a defense or something like that. And you're going to be able to go through for each different position here and see what the edge is based on each different position. So you'll be able to make some really good decisions. It's going to be able to be something that I think hand builders and single entry players are going to be able to use better than MME players. Mostly just because I think that it gives you some very clear choices to make when you're building out like 5 or 10 lineups. So that's going to be the contest simulation program that you have over at Paydirt. I think that it is very good, very strong. I've been using it for MLB, the same logic, and had really, really good success. If you've been in the Paydirt Discord, you have seen me using those simulations for MLB, and I've posted some of them to Twitter, but this is the same logic, and I think that it's really strong. So that's the contest sim. I will do some more kind of like streams of it and show some more usage of it once I get the user upload function, because I made those fucking changes this morning and I didn't test it before I did this video. But I digress. Whatever. So now let's talk a little bit about what I think the contest sims are going to do for the industry this year. So fucking everyone has a contest simulation program, seemingly out of nowhere. Skotastic basically built theirs. I was working on mine for like the last year or so. I've been running it for baseball, and I was working on it before that. And then Skotastic comes out and is like, hey, look, we have contest sims. And I'm like, that's not really a contest sim, but okay, it's cool. And then SaberSim has theirs now, which I assume that they just bootstrapped together based on their backend logic. Solver is building one as well, and I'm sure theirs will be pretty cool and will be useful. But what's it going to do? So a lot of people say that this is like going to reduce a lot of edge. It's going to make it so everybody is building useful lineups. It's going to, make it so it's harder to win for a lot of players, because everybody is going to have access to better things. So first, you can lead a horse to water, but you can't force it to drink, right? Even people who have access to optimizers can't fucking use them to save their lives. People don't understand how these programs work. There are people that are paying for projection sets that have no idea how projections are made. There are people who are just pressing optimize or just trying to find the answers or the plays or whatever. There's still people, RPS over there, that, they put out cores of players, and people just use those without thinking about how to build an actual lineup. So I think that this technology and this method does not change a bad player to a good player. I don't even think that it really changes a shitty player to a bad player. There's still going to be a lot of bad lineups. I don't think that the 20% of lineups that we find every single year at the bottom of every NFL contest are suddenly going to be reduced to only 15%. I think that at worst, it makes 1% of the player base better, and then makes another 5% question what they're actually looking at. You see all the time that even with an optimizer, people will optimize a lineup, and then they'll look at it, and then they have no idea how to choose what optimized lineup to use. Or they'll use an optimal, and then they'll just tinker with it and tweak it for the 7 minutes up to lock, and then all of a sudden they have a bad lineup because they decided to tinker and tweak with it. So I think that the human nature of this, and the human nature of rather being right than making money, which I think is a really good way to put it, I just think that people will continue to do that no matter what technology they have. So maybe let's assume that this reduces the edge by 1%. Where does that 1% actually end up being transferred to? And the answer is probably it goes to the really good players that then have access to this kind of stuff that didn't before. There are players that likely have had access to this, like pro players that have been really, really good and have been using technology like this for a while. Their edge likely gets reduced a bit. And then there are pro players that did not have access to this kind of stuff, and their edge probably goes up a little bit, right? The middle ground players that will use this and understand it, maybe their edge goes up a bit as well. But I don't know how much, because this kind of stuff, if people think that optimizing a portfolio is hard, building a portfolio using contest simulations is harder. It doesn't give you all the answers, and it makes it so things are less black and white. It's kind of like this is, if a portfolio is a median projection, then a contest simulation is a range of outcomes. And people have a hard enough time understanding a median projection, so I don't think that they're going to be able to understand a range of outcomes very well in this sense. So I think Maybe a couple years down the line, if everybody continues to build out and improve on and polish out these contest simulations and add more bells and whistles, maybe in a couple years, that edge will trickle down to the mid-level group, the guys who are usually finishing somewhere between the 60th to 30th percentiles in contests. But that dead money, those players that are just giga smooth brain, that's not going to improve them at all, man. People will just continue to think that they're smarter than what machines can give. People will still think that the eye test matters more than the spreadsheets. Like, it is what it is. So, in closing, right, because I don't want to get, like, too fucking deep on this, I think that this is really, really exciting. And I think that we're going to kind of see a lot of who is just doing this because it's what the hot thing is right now, and who is doing it because they understand what it is. I think that there's going to be a lot of kind of showing what companies and what understanding of this kind of technology different companies have. I think there's going to be a lot of edge had. The last thing that I want to say about how the field uses this, because this was an important point and something that I think needs to be spoken to. There was a comment that the field is going to now pivot away from the chalk and get on to the best pivots because of the contest sims. And while that makes sense in theory, it doesn't make sense in practice. And the reason for that is, remember at the beginning of this video when I said that if people are using their own projections, it's going to say that their portfolio of lineups is the best that can possibly be used. What I think we'll actually see is that the chalk ends up getting more condensed. Because people like Skotastic, who have a really high player base, are going to be using their own projections and their own optimizer to then simulate against their own lineups. And it's kind of like a snake eating its own tail situation, where it's basically going to say, hey, the chalk plays are still undervalued based on what you're feeding into it. And then people are just going to stay on the chalk. I think it'll actually cause less people to pivot. And because of companies like SaberSim using a static field, you may actually end up with optimized lineups having a higher dupe factor. So I think what we're actually going to see is now there's going to be a lot of people that are saying, oh, well, the chalk is still undervalued. I'm going to continue to stay on the chalk. There's no reason for me to pivot off of it. And if they do pivot off of it, I think that what they'll end up doing is getting on the really low-owned plays and not the mid-low-owned plays, right? So getting on like the 5% owned players rather than the 10% owned players. So one of the largest edges that you could have had in DFS still is just getting off of a really high-owned player for a pretty high-owned player. Getting off of the 26% owned player for the 20% owned player. I don't think that edge goes away. I think that we probably see the 20% owned running back end up 25 to 30% owned. I think we see the 5% owned running back probably 7 to 8% owned and no fucking changes in between. So I don't think that the edge is that much reduced for a lot of the field. I think that the players who use this technology effectively are going to have a really good season. And then I think the smooth brains are going to continue to think that median projection should be exactly what happens every single time. Anyway, I hope that you enjoyed this talk. I hope that you enjoyed the little demonstration of how to use the contest sim over at Paydirt. If you have not gotten a subscription over at Paydirt for NFL season, I think you should. I think that it's still the best value in the industry, and I think that I do a really good job building things over there, obviously. And yeah, no matter where you're subscribing to, be smart. Think about these things, learn about these things, and hopefully you have an awesome NFL season. Yeah, if you have any questions, you can hit me up on Twitter at Paydirt_DFS, or you can find me over in the free Discord over at Paydirt. You can go in the members drop down on the site and find a free link over to that. I'm going to get out of here and continue building and go fix that fucking user mistake that I had in this demonstration. So thank you guys for tuning in. I hope that you guys have an awesome day.